Hello, hello. Welcome back. We are here for the Phantom Tollbooth, ready to read Chapter 3. But before we jump into Chapter 3, it's always good to review where we've been, just as a little refresher. So our main character, Milo, he hopped into his mysteriously gifted toll booth, and it first took him to the land of expectations. And the way Milo described the land of expectations, he used words like rich, bright, vibrant. There were beautiful flowers, trees that lined the highway. Milo was speeding along almost as though he wasn't having to do anything. And there he encountered a rather peculiar man, the Weatherman. And if you remember from Read Aloud yesterday, the Weatherman had quite the personality. And he had a lot of interesting things to say. Some might call his ideas wise. But Milo wasn't really able to hear and to understand his message. Not quite yet. So, from the land of expectations, Milo continued onward on his adventure. But before long, he entered a new location, the Doldrums. And in fact, doldrum is a real word. You can find it in the dictionary. If you look it up, it's a noun, 2 syllables, doldrum, and it means a state of inactivity. So it means to be in the doldrums means that you are inactive. The prefix in means not, so you are not active. Maybe you're subdued, maybe you're quiet. In the Phantom Tollbooth, there were a couple laws, a couple rules you had to follow in the doldrums. You couldn't think, and you couldn't laugh. And if you've ever been in the doldrums in real life, you probably weren't thinking a whole lot either. You probably weren't laughing much either. So it makes sense that the lethargians, the individuals who live in the doldrums, can't laugh and can't think. And Milo almost followed the lethargians to nowhere. But luckily for us, he didn't. If he had, our story probably would have ended. Nothing would have happened there. There certainly would not have been any thinking, no adventures. But luckily, the watchdog arrived. And the watchdog helped Milo. Milo realized he had a problem, and he asked the watchdog, "How can I get out of the doldrums? I can't get my car to move. I'm stuck." And the watchdog simply said, "Well, you got here because you weren't thinking. So to leave, it makes sense that you have to begin thinking." Which is just what Milo did, and before you know it, he was back on the road, which is where we pick up now. Chapter 3. Welcome to Dictionopolis. "You must excuse my gruff conduct," the watchdog said, after they'd been driving for some time. "But you see, it's traditional for us watchdogs to be ferocious." Milo was just relieved at having escaped the doldrums, so he assured the dog he had no ill will toward him, and in fact he was grateful for his assistance. "Splendid!" shouted the watchdog. "I'm very pleased. I'm sure we'll be great friends for the rest of the trip. You may call me Talk." That's a strange name for a dog who goes tick, 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 said Milo. "Why didn't they call you—" "Don't say it," gasped the dog, and Milo could see a tear welling up in his eye. "I didn't mean to hurt your feelings," said Milo, genuinely not meaning to hurt his feelings. "That's all right," said the dog, getting hold of himself. "It's an old story, and a sad one, but I can tell it to you now. When my brother was born, the first pup in the family, my parents were overjoyed and immediately named him Tick, in expectation of the sound they were sure he'd make. Upon first winding him, they discovered to their horror, instead of going tick, 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 he went talk, 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 talk. They rushed to the Hall of Records to change the name. But it was too late. It had already been officially inscribed, and nothing could be done. When I arrived, they were determined not to make the same mistake twice, and since it seemed logical that all their children would make the same sound, they named me Talk. Of course, you know the rest of the story. My brother is called Tick because he goes talk, 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 and I am called Talk because I go tick, 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 tick. And both of us are forever burdened with the wrong names. My parents were so overwrought that they gave up having any more children and devoted their lives to good work for the poor and the hungry. But how did you become a watchdog? Asked Milo, hoping to change the subject, as Tok was sobbing quite uncontrollably now. That, he said, rubbing a paw to his eye, is also traditional. My family have always been watchdogs. It's been passed down from father to son, almost since time began. You see, he continued, beginning to feel better, once there was no time at all, and people found it very inconvenient. They never knew whether they were eating lunch or if they were eating dinner, and they were always missing trains. So time was invented to help them keep track of the day and get places when they should. When they began to count all the time that was available, what with 60 seconds to a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, 365 days in a year, it seemed as if there was much more time than could ever be used. If there's so much time, it can't possibly be valuable, was the general opinion. People wasted it. People even gave it away. Then we were given the job of seeing that no one wasted time again, he said, sitting up proudly. It's hard work, but a noble calling. For you see, he was now standing on the seat, one paw on the windshield, shouting with his arms outstretched, "It is our most valuable possession, more precious than diamonds, I say. It marches on. It and the tides wait for no man." And at this point, the car hit a bump in the road and the watchdog collapsed in a heap on the front seat with his alarm ringing furiously. Are you all right? Shouted Milo. Ugh, grunted Tok. Sorry to get carried away, but I think you get the point. As they drove along, Tok continued to explain the importance of time, quoting old philosophers and poets, and illustrating each point with gestures that brought him dangerously close to tumbling headfirst from the speeding automobile. Before long, they saw in the distance the towers and flags of Dictionopolis, sparkling in the sunshine, and in a few moments they reached the Great Wall and stood at the gate to the city. Ahem! Roared the gateman, clearing his throat and snapping smartly to attention. This is Dictionopolis, a happy kingdom, advantageously located in the foothills of confusion and caressed by gentle breezes from the sea of knowledge. Today, by royal decree, is market day. Have you come to buy, or have you come to sell? I beg your pardon? Said Milo. Buy or sell? Sell or buy? Repeated the gateman impatiently. Which is it? You must have come here for some reason. Well, Milo stammered. Come on! If you don't have a reason, you must at least have an explanation. Or certainly an excuse, interrupted the gateman. Milo shook his head. Very serious indeed, the gateman said, again shaking his head. You can't get in without a reason. He thought for a moment and then continued. Wait a minute. Maybe I have an old reason you can use. He took a battered suitcase from the gatehouse and began to rummage busily through it, mumbling to himself, No, not that. This certainly won't do. This is fine, he cried triumphantly, holding up a small medallion on a chain. He dusted it off, and engraved on one side were the words, Why not? That's a good reason for almost anything. A bit used, perhaps, but still quite serviceable. And with that, he placed it around Milo's neck, pushed back the heavy iron gate, bowed low, and motioned them into the city. I wonder what the market will be like, thought Milo, as they drove through the gate. But before there was time for an answer, they had driven into an immense square, crowded with long lines of stalls, heaped with merchandise and decorated in gay-colored bunting. Overhead, a large banner proclaimed, Welcome to the Word Market. And from the square, 5 very tall, thin gentlemen, regally dressed in silk and satin, plumed hats, and buckled shoes, rushed up to the car, stopped short, mopped 5 brows, caught 5 breaths, unrolled 5 parchments, and began in turn. Greetings, salutations, welcome, good afternoon, hello. Milo nodded his head, and they went on, reading from their scrolls. By order of Azaz the Unabridged, King of Dictionopolis, Monarch of Letters, Emperor of Phrases, Sentences, and Miscellaneous Figures of Speech, we offer you the hospitality of our kingdom, of our country, of our nation, our state, the commonwealth, our realm, our palatinate, our principality. Do those words mean the same thing? Asked Milo. Of course, certainly, precisely, exactly, yes, they repeated in order. Well then, said Milo, not understanding why each one said the same thing in a slightly different way. Wouldn't it be simpler to use just one word? It would certainly make more sense to me. Nonsense! Ridiculous! Fantastic! Absurd! Bosh! They chorused again and continued. We're not interested in making sense. It's not our job, scolded the first. Besides, explained the second, one word is as good as another, so why not use them all? Then you don't have to choose which one is right, advised the third. Besides, added the fourth, if one is right, then 10 are 10 times as right. Obviously you don't know who we are, sneered the fifth, and they presented themselves one by one as the Duke of Definition, the Minister of Meaning, the Earl of Essence, the Count of Connotation, and finally the Undersecretary of Understanding. Milo acknowledged the introduction, and as Tok growled softly, the minister explained, You see, we are the king's advisors, or in more formal terms, his cabinet. Cabinet, recited the Duke. 1. A small private room or closet, case with drawers, etc., for keeping valuables or displaying curiosities. 2. Council room for chief ministers of state. 3. A body of official advisors to the chief executive of a nation. You see, continued the minister, bowing thankfully to the Duke, Dictionopolis is the place where all the words in the world come from. They're grown right here in our orchards. I didn't know words grew on trees, said Milo. Where did you think they grew? Shouted the Earl irritably. A small crowd began to gather to see the little boy who didn't know that letters grew on trees. I guess I didn't know they grew at all, admitted Milo, even more timidly this time. Several people shook their heads sadly. Well, money doesn't grow on trees, does it? Demanded the Count. I've heard not, said Milo. Well, then something must. Why not words? Exclaimed the Undersecretary triumphantly. The crowd cheered his display of logic and continued about its business. To continue, continued the minister impatiently. Once a week, by royal proclamation, the word market is held here in the great square, and people come from everywhere to buy the words they need or trade in the words they haven't used. Our job, said the Count, is to see that all the words sold are proper ones, for it wouldn't do to sell someone a word that had no meaning or didn't exist at all. For instance, if you bought a word like blah, where would you use it? It would be difficult, thought Milo, but there were so many words that were difficult, and he hardly knew any of them. But we never choose which ones to use, explained the Earl as they walked toward the market stalls, for as long as they mean what they mean to mean, we don't care if they make sense or nonsense. Innocence or magnificence, added the Count. Reticence or common sense, said the Undersecretary. That seems simple enough, said Milo, trying to be polite. Easy as falling off a log, cried the Earl, falling off a log with a loud thump. Must you be so clumsy? shouted the Duke. All I said was, began the Earl, rubbing his head. We heard you, said the minister angrily, and you'll have to find an expression that's less dangerous next time. The Earl dusted himself off as the other snickered audibly. You see, cautioned the Count, you must pick your words very carefully, and be sure to say just what you intend to say. And now we must leave to make preparations for the royal banquet. You'll be there, of course, said the minister. But before Milo had a chance to say anything, they were rushing off across the square as fast as they had come. Enjoy yourself in the market, shouted back the undersecretary. Market, recited the Duke, an open space or covered building in which... And that was the last Milo heard as they disappeared into the crowd. I never knew words could be so confusing, Milo said to Tock as he bent down to scratch the dog's ear. Only when you use a lot to say a little, answered Tock. Milo thought this was quite the wisest thing he'd heard all day. Come, he shouted, let's see the market. It looks very exciting. That's the end of chapter 3. Chapter 3, in the books, as they say. One of my favorite chapters because I like words, and so it makes sense that Dictionopolis, which sounds like one of my favorite resources that's often used in our classroom, the dictionary, is one of my favorite places. And Milo didn't necessarily share my enjoyment as much. He thought it was kind of confusing, weird, why the gentleman of Dictionopolis would use so many words that kind of mean the same thing. But one very interesting idea that they shared was that they grow all of the words in Dictionopolis in their orchard. Similar to, I don't know, like an apple orchard where apples would be grown. Now, you and I know that words don't grow on trees. Things like apples, pears, oranges, fruit grow on trees. But this is a piece of fiction, and the author is having a little bit of fun here. So, got me thinking about what a fun activity would be to make my own word orchard. And so we want to start with our fundamental words, and in our classroom we always start by looking at nouns. And I'm sure all of you are really familiar with nouns and the three forms that they take: persons, places, and things. So I've gotten started with my word orchard here, and I've chosen one of each of those categories. A place. I chose the word workspace because now that I'm working from home and trying to do lessons from home, I've had to make a space in my house where I'm working, and I've kind of taken a little bit of pride in it. And so one of the words I'm going to explore is workspace. The person I'd like to think about is my grandma. I'm thinking a lot about her, especially right now, and just hoping that she's healthy, safe, and she's keeping up with all of her books. And then the thing I want to think about, I chose an apple because we're thinking about orchards, and I live in Indiana, which is really close to Michigan, which has a lot of apple orchards, and going to apple orchards is one of my favorite things to do in the fall. Anyway, you don't care about that. But I've chosen my person, place, and my thing, and I wrote it in the trunk of my tree. But now I need to think about words that describe each of these. So I'm going to start with my grandma. And when I think about her, a lot of stories, a lot of memories come to mind. But there's a few words in particular that I think describe her. So one of them is she's very generous. So I'm going to draw a limb to my tree, and I'm going to write the word generous in it. Now my grandma is generous not just with me, but with everyone she seems to encounter. She gives of her time, she volunteers, she gives of her money, she is just always very generous, and she's generous to me also. When I was younger, she would always make sure to bring fruit over that I could try. She loved apricots, I love pears, she always brought both of those. She's just very generous. Another thing that comes to mind when I think about my grandma is she's comical. She's got a great sense of humor, and her sense of humor it's always there, even when other people aren't finding the humor in a situation. So like a time right now, she always looks on the positive side of things, and she always kind of puts a humorous spin on it. So my grandma is comical. I'm just writing it at the end of the branches of my word tree, and oops, I'm gonna go ahead and put some leaves around that. And now my goal is gonna be to fill out each of these trees. This kind of looks sparse. It's kind of like a Dr. Seuss-y looking tree. But I want to come up with enough words to describe my grandma that this is going to look really full, and it's going to have a whole canopy of leaves. So I'll just do one more, but when you're doing this activity, I imagine you're going to come up with far more than I did. So the last one about my grandma, she's very kind, not just to her family members, but she's kind to everyone that she encounters. And I think that's a quality of greatness that she shows every day. Something I know that I definitely admire, and I would like to show more often. That's something that she models for me. I'm sure you have many adults in your life that also model that kindness. All right, well, you can see my word orchard, one of my trees is starting to fill out. I still see some gaps. You can draw branches in all different directions because, plants are always going to they're always going to try to find that light. So who knows? Maybe one of the branches down here is getting some of that sunlight, and you could put many other words to describe your nouns. If you're having a tough time coming up with ideas for a person, place, and a thing, use my ideas. I'm sure you have a workspace at home, or maybe you'd like to have one, and you could think about the words that would describe that space. Quiet, organized, has everything I need, etc. You could use grandma. Every one of you has a grandmother, maybe your grandpa, maybe a mom, dad, sibling. If you're getting in fights with your siblings, put their name in here and think about all of the positive things about them that maybe when you're next to one another and you're in such close proximity, maybe you forget about from time to time, but it might be nice to think about those positives. Go ahead, choose apple. Heck, choose anything, because things are nouns. My goal for you would be to come up with at least 5 for each, so that would be what? We'd have 5 for the person, 5 for the place, 5 for the thing. 5 plus 5 plus 5 is processing time. Processing time. 15. Try to come up with 15 attributes. Take a picture of it. Send it my way. I'd love to see what you've come up with and your juicy, vivid words to describe them. Still me, still here. Still so many things that you could do with Chapter 3 of The Phantom Tollbooth. And one of my favorite parts is when the 5 gentlemen tell Milo and Talk their titles. So I'm just going to read them to you because it's always good to go back to the text and listen to see maybe if you can pick up why I find it so funny and so interesting. The Duke of Definition, the Minister of Meaning, the Earl of Essence, the Count of Connotation, the Undersecretary of Understanding. In Chapter 3, and frankly in a lot of The Phantom Tollbooth, our author, Norton Juster, is playing with words. He's using figurative language. It's when language kind of breaks from the norm, and it's meant to draw attention to it. In this case, I think it's meant to build vocabulary, but also just to kind of be fun. It happens to confuse Milo. It might have confused you when you were listening to it, but that's okay. So I was thinking about alliteration. And alliteration happens when words that start with the same sound are used repeatedly in a sentence. When words that start with the same sound are used repeatedly in a sentence. So I'm going to do some ABC alliteration. So what I've done here is I have written my alphabet, A, B, blah, 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 Z, blah, 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 blah. You know what else is going to fit in that area. But I'm going to look at my letter A, and I'm going to come up with some alliterations for the letter A. So I have, what do I have? How about some angry alligators? Angry, and I'm going to put all my A's in red, so I'll keep this open and handy. Angry alligators, and what did they do? How about they ate? I could leave it there. That's a complete sentence. Subject and a predicate, but let's get more creative. Let's add a direct object. Angry alligators ate anchovies. And because it's silly and fun, I'm going to put an exclamation point at the end of my sentence. Angry alligators ate anchovies. Same beginning sound in our alphabet. All right, let's do the same with B. B, what do I have to start with? How about some bored bears? Bored bears. That's not a sentence. There's no action. What did the bored bears do? Ooh, I know. Bored bears became best juicy mistake. Became best buds. Bored bears became best buds. All right, your turn. Go ahead. Maybe you can start with my A and B sentences, or I imagine you also came up with a different one for A, maybe B, and go ahead and fill out your alphabet. Now, that's 26 letters, so that means 26 sentences. If you're worried that it's going to take a long time, break it up into small chunks. That's what I do when I have a big project. I might do 5 sentences. Then I'll go get a drink of water. Maybe I'll read a little bit, come back to it, do another 5, and so on until I get to the end. That's what helps me get these big projects done. You probably notice I don't do the whole video from beginning all the way to the end. I break it up into small chunks because otherwise it becomes difficult and I get a little overwhelmed. So if you're going to do this, break it up into small chunks, and before you know it, your ABC alliteration will be done.